The top free agent DH option came off the board for the Mets on Monday as Jose Abreu signed a 3-year deal with the Houston Astros. Does this now mean the Mets will look to stay internal at the designated hitter position, or could they look elsewhere in free agency? I'll discuss all of that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, Jose Abreu came off the board today, signing a 3-year deal with the Houston Astros. This is big news as it relates to the Mets because Abreu seemed like a natural fit if the Mets decided to upgrade that DH position to go after in free agency. I mean, I think it was MLB.com wrote an article, and I really just saw the headline, but it made me really think about it, which was that Jose Abreu was the top hitter on the market not named Aaron Judge this offseason. And you can go through and say, is that really fair when you have a Trey Turner or Carlos Correa, Xander Bogaerts in this free agent market? I think you can make an argument for any of those guys, and certainly their age would favor them. But if you're looking at the track record, the history, I mean, Jose Abreu might have been the best hitter not named Aaron Judge. It really is a possibility. A 133 career WRC plus, again, that is weighted runs created plus, measuring hitters by a league average of 100. He's been exceptional throughout his career. Rookie season, obviously he defected from Cuba, comes over, signs with the White Sox, wins the Rookie of the Year. He actually had the best OPS plus in baseball that year. I was writing an article today when he signed for Just Baseball, and I'm thinking of this off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it was over 170 is OPS plus, and that's a very similar stat to weighted runs created plus. WRC plus is Fangraphs version. Baseball Reference has OPS plus. So, there's the best hitter in baseball, arguably, as a rookie. He had 4 consecutive 100 RBI seasons in his first 4 big league years with the White Sox. Had a year in between where he missed some time. Comes back 2019, led the league in RBIs. Led the league in RBIs in 2020. Hit 19 home runs in 60 games. I think he led the league in slugging, OPS plus, hits and games played because he played in all 60. He was amazing. He was absolutely amazing. He was good in 2021. This past year, we did see a decline in home runs for Jose Abreu down to 15, but we saw his strikeout rate get cut. His walk rate continues to climb. He just gives good at-bats. He still hit over 300. Got on base at a 370-plus clip. I mean, a guy that, if the Mets had signed him, he would have replaced Daniel Vogelbach pretty much, and he would have fit on both sides. That would be an everyday. You might have heard that outside, a loud car whizzing past my window here. But regardless, Jose Abreu was a clear-cut upgrade, but $20 million a season for a guy that is in his mid-30s, and that makes you wonder, as we'll eventually get to the other candidates on the market in the final segment today when we dive into a JD Martinez. I mean, how much does he improve your team, and what type of a contract does he get? Because I know JD Martinez dealt with some injuries and things this year, and we weren't entirely sure if what we were watching was 100% of who JD Martinez is now, or if that was a player trying to fight through injuries and a little bit compromised. Maybe that was why we saw that dip in production. There's not a lot of good options. Jose Abreu was the one, and then there's, of course, your other free agents that are out there. If you were to go out, and I discussed last week, I believe, the idea of signing a Cody Bellinger and a Michael Conforto. If you were to get 2 outfielders to replace Brandon Nimmo, then one of them could be cycled in the DH spot, and that would be a way to really operate. But since you have Daniel Vogelbach, it's about the right-handed half of that DH. I mean, Daniel Vogelbach is the Mets DH next season. That's where we're at right now. And I think that's okay. We'll get into the numbers in the next segment here. That's perfectly suitable for this Mets club. But Jose Abreu would have been an upgrade, and now that's off the table. So you're just trying to figure out where this team can improve, and ultimately, the more that we have gone through the exercise of this offseason and sort of look at where the Mets are prioritizing, it's clear that Jacob deGrom is the domino they're waiting to fall. They land him, and Nimmo's still out there. Maybe that's something that'll get pursued. It seems like Nimmo, because of the widespread interest, has a pretty good chance to end up on another team. So with that, you're going to have to replace his production, and you're going to have to round out this roster. But as we said from the beginning, a lot of the guys are coming back next year. You know, Mark Canha and Eduardo Escobar could be everyday players again. And that's really the place where you could see, you know, where does this team maybe get a little bit better? It would be the internal improvements of a Brett Baty taking Escobar's job and sliding him into that DH role. We saw he was better right-handed, so very possible the DH could be Vogelbach, Escobar. And with that, you know, maybe things make more sense. So that's what we're going to start with next here. Internally, how do the Mets get better at DH next season? Who are the options? If Abreu is now off the table and there's no one else they're going to sign, do they have enough bodies to man that position next season? We're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer to esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. If you go there right now, you can bet on some free agents. You can bet if Jacob deGrom is going to leave elsewhere. You can hedge your happiness a bit. Try to bet on the top landing spot for him. If he does sign elsewhere, Justin Verlander at plus 375 to come to the Mets. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. Bet online, where the game starts. Looking at the Mets' internal options at the DH spot, Daniel Vogelbach is expected to take a big role next season, and rightfully so. I mean, you look at the numbers he put up after the trade to the Mets. 255 hitter, 393 on base percentage, 436 slugging, a 144 WRC plus. He walked in 18% of his at-bats. You look at the walk rate. You know how many players in baseball had a better walk rate than Daniel Vogelbach after he went to the Mets on July 24th was his first game? Yeah, Aaron Judge, 22.5. Juan Soto, 21.3. Jesse Winker, 18.3. And then you get to Vogelbach. The on-base percentage had him pretty high up here. It was 12th in all of baseball. You look at the WRC plus of 144. That had him tie with Lindor in the top 30. It was a really good run of success. And even if you take his time at the beginning of the year with the Pirates, look at his complete season, you're looking at 18 home runs and 461 plate appearances, 59 RBIs, 47 runs scored, walked at a 15.8% clip, struck out 24.7% of the time, 238 hitter, 360 on base, 433 slugging, a 128 WRC plus. They're bringing the porch in a bit in right center field. That's going to help Vogelbach next year. You're eliminating the shift. That's going to help Vogelbach. Let's look at his splits this past season with the shift, without the shift. Wow, no shift at all. Only 9 plate appearances. So not a good enough sample. He was shifted basically the whole time. But without it, as a pull hitter, big lefty, that should help him. If you can bump up that batting average by even 15 to 20 points, and you take him from being, a 255 hitter as a Met, and you make him a 270 hitter, the on-base percentage would be over 400. That's elite, and I think the power is the question with Vogelbach, because you need him to slug more than 436, because the problem with Vogelbach, as much as you love him getting on base and drawing walks, he's cement-footed. I mean, he's a big old dude. We love seeing him get after it and run around those bases, but I mean, let's be honest, he's not going to score a lot of doubles from first base. And when he did, sure, it was magical. It's just not going to happen every day. And scoring from second on a single is tough. So because he's station to station, that makes his value a little bit less pronounced as an on-base threat, clearly. But if he can tap into a little more power, and look, this is a guy that does have a 30 home run season on his resume, maybe we could see a better season from Daniel Vogelbach next year. But he is a really nice floor option for this team. Now, where the ceiling comes in for the DH spot with the Mets is Mark Vientos, it's Francisco Alvarez, it's Brett Baty, it's being able to move Eduardo Escobar into a DH role so you can play the hot hand a bit. If Escobar is having another season where he's nothing from the left side of the plate and great at righty, well, there you go. That's your DH platoon. He could be the right-handed half. You could have Vogelbach the left-handed half. And Brett Baty, I really do believe by May, he's going to be the starting third baseman. I really think that's the case. I think he's right there. We saw him make his debut. He homered his first at-bat, first swing he took. I think he's going to grab that job. And so if he's your starting third baseman, now you got Escobar and Vogelbach in the mix. Mark Vientos graduated this past year. I think a full off season, get him in spring training, get him a ton of at-bats. I think he could be that complement to Vogelbach. And I know everyone wants to cry and scream about the idea of Darin Ruf making this team. He's still on this roster. He's making I know it's less than 4. I honestly think it's like 2.5 million. Let me look up the exact contract that Darin Ruf is on, because I think he's under control for 2 more years, actually. So, the Mets, they should keep this guy around at this point because he's cheap, and eventually you could probably flip him. He has too much success since he came back from the KBO, and he was still a solid hitter against left-handed pitching with the Giants last year, to have just completely fallen off a cliff and never be good again. He got to this point where he struggled. First time in New York, really rough to adjust, but rough, haha, pun, not intended. But look, it's $3 million next season, $3.5 million club option with a $250K buyout. So maybe this is his last year, but you have him. It's a $3 million non-tender. Last year, the non-tendered Robinson Cano's $20.25 million. So if he sucks, he can't hit again in spring training, fine, but every reason to let him compete with Mark Vientos. And the two of them go head-to-head. Between them, between Vogelbach, between Escobar and Baty, there's a lot of options. Center field has to be filled. It does. No doubt about it. And that could be Marte. In fact, I think this week, I'm going to do a podcast on Starling Marte and the idea of him playing center field next year, because look at the other options out there. I mean, if you told me in a vacuum, Starling Marte is your starting center fielder or Cody Bellinger, who do you want? It's obvious. It's Marte. Now, the fact that would then create another vacancy in right field is where the conversation gets more interesting. But when we look at what the Mets need, DH isn't necessarily a need. It is a luxury to improve, but Daniel Vogelbach, with some combination of Ruf, of Escobar, of Vientos, of Baty, Francisco Alvarez could be the DH next year as well. Are the Mets going to hang on to James McCann this offseason? If they do, there's a great chance they're going to carry 3 catchers, because you're not going to just get rid of the Nido. So if you do carry all your catchers next season, you got 3 catchers. Let's just say, 26-man roster, 8-man bullpen, so you got 13 position players. You just start adding them up. Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Eduardo Escobar, Brett Baty. You got Canna, you got Marte, you got whoever the Nimmo replacement is. That's already 8. You got Guillorme, that's 9. You got Vogelbach, and then you got 3 catchers. That's 13 players right there. So it's hard to add multiple position players, and then you're also trying to figure out how you juggle the outfield and get enough guys that can play center field. That's where you'd like to see the Mets maybe eat half the salary and ship McCann elsewhere. That would be the perfect scenario that I could envision. If everything broke the way I'd want, they would trade McCann. They'd sign whatever the 2022 equivalent of Rene Rivera is. on a minor league deal, and then you would hope that Alvarez would grab the job in spring training, and you would have Nido and Alvarez switching off. And on days where Nido is catching, you probably want Alvarez's bat in the lineup at DH. So again, we're going to go through the other free agents in a minute here to just see if there's any more value that can be had at the DH position. But it makes a lot of sense to stick internal at the designated hitter spot, especially now that the one guy that would have been a clear upgrade is off the board. But we're going to get to who else is out there in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Who else could the Mets sign in free agency to be the DH? As I said, I believe they stay internal, and I think that that's probably the right call, but let's just go through it. Catcher position. We're going to go position by position here. Because they got Alvarez, I just don't see it. Wilson Contreras obviously would be a nice complement to Vogelbach at DH, and he could be a starting catcher for you, but that was a trade deadline type acquisition. He's going to want a long-term deal. No sense in doing that when you not only have Alvarez, you got Kevin Parada in the pipeline now as well. You go to first base, Brandon Belt. He's very interesting. Tomorrow's show, I want to explore, either tomorrow, here's the next two shows. We're going to do one on Marte, and then we're going to do one where I explore guys that can sign a one-year deal with the Mets and be of great value. Brandon Belt was one of those guys for me. You look at what he did in 2020. I think in 2021 he was solid too. I have to go through the stats. We made on justbaseball.com, we did the most underrated free agents who was on the list, and there's a very compelling argument for Brandon Belt being a huge bounce-back candidate next year. So you could sign Belt, give you some insurance at first base, and let him DH for you. Problem is, complementary skill set with Vogelbach. You know, Josh Bell, switch hitter, I just don't see it. I think that he's going to go somewhere else where he can have the chance to absolutely play every day, which, while the Mets would most likely be able to give him that, considering the way he faded down the second half, I don't know if that could be a guarantee. You go to second baseman, yeah, sure, you can get Gene Segura and push McNeil out to right field. Not the worst option. That doesn't really do anything at DH. Gene Segura is going to play the field. And I also don't think that that's likely either. I think the Mets are going to try to fill that need in the outfield without moving McNeil, but of course, that's still a card they could play. The shortstops, I mean, we talked about the elite of the elite. None of them would profile as the DH of the Mets, so we don't need to go there. Elvis Andrus is a good player, so if you wanted to say, I love Louis Guillorme. Let's say, though, that there's a team out there that is willing to give you, a really nice relief arm with control, and they want Louis Guillorme to be their everyday second baseman. You could make that type of a deal and then sign an Elvis Andrus to be your backup shortstop utility infielder who could get some time at DH. And he had a lot of success in Chicago, but again, not really likely. Third base. Three names that jump out. Four if we include Brian Anderson. Now I'm thinking about it. Brian Anderson's nice because you can play him at right field and third base as well as DH him. He's got a cannon of an arm. He had some tough times in Miami, but he also had stretches of success. He's interesting. I know the Mets have some interest in Charlie Culberson, but that wouldn't necessarily be a DH. It would be more a utility player role. You get to the three vets here. Brandon Drury the Mets have had. They could circle the wagon there as the complement to Vogelbach at DH, but I think Drury is going to want to take what he just did and be an everyday player. There's two vets, though, older vets. Drury is definitely a vet at 30, but Justin Turner, that is, and Evan Longoria could both come to the Mets, seeing a team they can win now with, a team that they could, play some third base and complement, but really could DH guys that have had some injury history, particularly Longoria, more than Turner, but Turner over recent years as well, a way to keep them on their feet, and guys that, could actually be your full-time DH. Longoria had some splits that would say he could be your lefty masher. Turner in the past, that has been the MO this past season. Slight reverse splits, but really he was just good across the board. Those are some offensive options the Mets could go after that would be upgrades if healthy over a Vogelbach, and I'd be fine with either of those guys. And if you were to get a Turner, a Longoria, or even a Drury or a Brian Anderson for that matter, that would be an admission that Darin Ruf has done, and that would be probably a sign that they'd be looking to trade a Mark Vientos and, even a James McCann. You'd have to be clearing roster spots to bring in one of these guys in, but they could certainly be upgrades. Go to the outfielders. Joey Gallo is someone we'll discuss on the show tomorrow. You'd want him playing defensively, but he could be a right fielder. Adam Duvall, it's the same thing. Again, that's more of a for the 1 year underrated type additions where these guys would be really good right fielders for you, and you could move Marte into center, and you would be banking on a bounce back. We've already spent enough time on Bellinger and Conforto. They're out there. Mitch Haniger as a right fielder that could get some time at DH, that's an option, and he certainly would pack a good punch. I really like that as a signing. I just don't know if the Mets are going to go there, and I also think that the Mariners might just retain him. The big one that I like, and this would be a replacing Vogelbach. You would probably hang on to Vogelbach, certainly. But this would be a guy that you would acquire to be your everyday DH if he was healthy, and that's Michael Brantley. If you could get Michael Brantley, you keep him off his feet by only playing him in left field limitedly. And really, maybe you have him start out in left field when you have Alvarez DH with Nito catching, and then you move Cano over to center. There's ways that you can work everybody in. And I could see Brantley getting some time out in left field, but at this stage of his career with the injuries he's had, if you made him your DH, this is one of the best hitters in baseball consistently year over year. I love Michael Brantley as a signing. Beyond that, could you take a flyer on Andrew McCutchen or Matt Carpenter? Sure. Trey Mancini, another option. Luke Voigt's now a free agent again, so if you wanted that righty complement to Vogelbach, Luke Voigt would be a name to look at. But for a guy like Voigt, you'd think he'd go somewhere with more clear playing time. Same thing with Mancini. McCutchen, I think, would be a possibility, but it seems like he's on the other side of his career. Matt Carpenter was really a product of that short porch in Yankee Stadium. And then there's JD Martinez, who we already discussed a little bit. I think that there's another team that's going to throw a bag at Martinez. JD Martinez looks at what Jose Abreu just got today, which was, I don't know if I saw it was close to 60. I don't know if it was exactly 60 or not, but it was about $20 million per year for Jose Abreu, and he's thinking, well, at least I should get 15, right? And if you're the Mets, I don't know if that's where you're trying to spend your money. So all signs continue to point towards internal improvements at DH, but there are other names out there that the Mets decided to sign that would improve the floor of your team. I still think that the highest ceiling of this roster, when you look at the free agent options now that Abreu is off the table, when you factor in injury risk for the guys like Longoria or Brantley, or even a Brandon Belt for that matter, I mean, any of those guys that are older, I think that the ceiling that Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, and Francisco Alvarez provide for you is just more than you're going to find in free agency. And you can bet on that ceiling in the first half. And if it doesn't work, you could do what you did last offseason and try to trade for a DH type at the deadline. But I think what we've saw by the Mets letting Abreu go to the Astros and not really getting heavily involved there is that they're comfortable with where they're at in DH. It really is about rebuilding this pitching staff and either re-signing Brandon Nimmo or replacing him. Other than that, offensively, this team is pretty set heading into the 2023 season. That's going to be all, though, for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As I already said, couple of different show options we could be looking at for tomorrow. So we'll see what we're going to do, either Marte or top 1 year free agent signings the Mets could make. Make sure you follow, rate, and review so you don't miss it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show, at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around the sports world, with instant game reactions, breaking news, the take of the day. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.